First email is from a woman in real love who, in her full-time job, is a counselor. She said, when I spend time with my clients, sometimes I take them places in my car. Yesterday, I was driving a client, and when we got to her apartment, I was ready to be done with our time together, and she was clingy. I told her that I would see her again and set our next appointment. And then I said, I gotta go now, but she kept talking and started a new topic. We've all had this experience. After a few minutes, I told her again, and she tried to keep talking. So I felt trapped. What's a good way to not be trapped with a client in my car? I will be with somebody today in my car, and I want to practice. This applies to being trapped with anybody, anywhere. We really hate being trapped. It makes us crazy. And it does because possibly the greatest gift that we have, our greatest power, is choice. And when we feel trapped, we feel like our choice is being taken from us. At least that's how we feel. So I never go anywhere without an exit. I really don't. I don't go to meetings without a way out. I tend to sit at the end of the row. If I'm going to be at a meeting and there's any possibility that it's going to be boring, I take my laptop so I can work on it. If I'm going to go to the store with somebody and they're going to be even possibly longer than I would be, willing to spend time freely, then I take a book and sit down and read. In a conversation, I've done it so many times, I'm prepared with words that I've learned that people can easily hear to end a conversation. If I'm visiting relatives, I tell them ahead of time what time we're arriving, and before we get there, what time we're leaving. So it sounds rigid, planned. No, I've just learned that I don't like feeling stuck somewhere, and none of us do. So now back to you trapped in the car, and I'm not guessing here. I've done this particular approach. You get out of the car, you go over to their side of the car, you open their door. We're getting to increasingly larger hints now. And you say, I've really enjoyed our talk. So here, and you extend your hand, let me help you out. And you do it the minute that it occurs to you to do it. As soon as you feel like, this conversation's pretty much over for me, you get out and you do it. You don't wait, or you'll stay too long, and then you'll be annoyed and exhausted, and it's going to go badly. So the bottom line is, always have a choice. This is from a man in real love who says, I'm a member of a number of Facebook pages or Facebook groups. And I responded to a post by a young lady, and we began flirting a little bit. She let me know that she lives not terribly far away. And when faced with the idea of actually meeting her, I thought about it and realized that if I did, I might feel obligated to her, and I didn't want that. So I decided to be honest, and I wrote her the following message. He said, quote, I want to talk straight to you. The idea of meeting you in person is enticing, but it also makes me a little nervous. I've spent most of my life believing that I was never going to have a relationship with a woman who truly cared about me. So I settled for girls who were willing to put up with me and have sex with me. And you are exactly the sort of girl that appeals to me for doing exactly that. You're cute, sexually appealing, and empowered, tattooed, unapologetic, and you're interested in me enough to flirt. There was a time when that was all I needed to be willing to sleep with someone. But now I'm trying to live differently. Well, that's pretty brave and open. I'm impressed. He continues in his letter. I don't want to be interested in you just because you have a nice body and a pretty face and you're interested in me. And I'm adoring your letter to her. This is how good relationships can begin, with this kind of honesty. The letter continues. I want to get to know you as a vulnerable, flawed human. And if we ever do meet, I want it to be without expectation, because despite the fact that I know it would likely be really pleasurable and tons of fun, I don't just want to go to bed with you. I'm just not that guy who's willing to settle anymore for great sex with a pretty girl. If you would be interested in us getting to know each other and seeing if we're compatible, that would be great. If that's not what you're interested in, no problem. This is a pretty flawless introduction of who you are to a potential partner. So nice work. This could be in the Real Love and Dating book. He says, she wrote back and she said she would love to get to know me some more. We texted a few times. We had a long conversation. We did some, meaningless chit chat, but I also told her some real stuff about myself. And she told the truth about herself a few times as well, talking about having some issues with addictive behaviors. This is a really good beginning. You're just killing me here so far. You continue. 2 moments in particular stood out. One, while we were talking, I noticed that she was starting to cling, especially when I was honest about flaws. She said that whether we actually started to date, she promised that she will always be there to take my call and support me if I needed to talk. I began to think that maybe she shouldn't make promises she shouldn't keep. Why this might be a bad thing. Why I should probably start distancing myself from her, blah, blah, blah. So I stopped. I remembered the people who love me, and I realized I was just trying to protect myself from getting hurt, and that she couldn't actually hurt me. My pain and my fear had nothing to do with her. And this is a result of doing what we talk about here every week. Finding, trusting, and remembering love. It makes you really stable when you're out in an environment where you're not so sure of yourself, not afraid. You continue, I chose to trust and believe her words, knowing full well that it didn't matter whether or not she actually followed through with her promise. Boy, are you smart. It's better just to trust and see what happens. This is brilliant. She might have been clinging, but you don't really know that this early in the relationship. You've met once. She might really have been trying to be compassionate. So what do? You just keep gathering information with more texts and emails and phone calls and personal visits. You say, I don't need to worry about anything until it becomes obvious that, for example, she can't be wrong, that she always has to be right, or that she can't be honest. And I haven't seen either of these so far. You're still batting 1,000, kid. You're just gathering information. You say, I mentioned real love and that I practice it and that it helped me out a lot. But until she decides she wants to learn more, or we start talking about a committed relationship, all I'm going to do is tell the truth and focus on taking responsibility for my own choices and happiness. So clearly you're not in a rush and you're not pushing her. Still beautiful. You might so far be the perfect dating partner. You say, I've been feeling really good lately, and even though there are times when I feel empty, it's only because I've forgotten to be peaceful for a moment, and it's nearly effortless to remember that this gift is always here for me and feel full again. No matter the outcome of what meeting this girl will be, I'm going to be happy. If we just remembered that, there would be no pressure to dating. It would be amazing. No matter what happens in a dating situation, you can still be happy if you feel unconditionally loved. So how can it hurt? You conclude, it's been a great learning experience so far, and if it ends tomorrow, then it ends. I'll still get to learn and be flawed and stupid in other ways. I have people who love me, and I always will, no matter what. Anything you suggest or would like to add. Not suggest or add, but comment. Perfect. Your initial interactions with this woman are just delightful. So if there's any suggestion, it's really just keep gathering information like you're doing. You interact, you gather more information, and then you'll kind of get a feel whether she's capable of learning to love or not. But what a delightful start. Here's somebody who writes and says, I found out today that a childhood friend of mine committed suicide last night. It was a shock, mostly because we all had no idea how much pain she was actually in. She was a master at hiding her pain. The thoughts of, I should have known that she was in pain, or I could have prevented this, came into my head. And my friends and I had a group conversation that went along those lines. You know, it's pretty easy afterward to say I should have known, but look at Robin Williams, the master of comedy, master at hiding pain, so entertaining that nobody even wanted to know about his pain. And then everybody said, oh, what a surprise. No, it really wasn't. You could see in his later years that his humor was getting darker and darker, and he was less and less happy. So why do we not see people's pain? Because we don't want to see their pain. And again, why? Well, we have almost no experience seeing people's pain. Nobody saw ours. So where would we have learned to see the pain of other people? We're also not equipped to see other people's pain. We're too drowning ourselves. We're in the water. Our eyes are barely clearing the lapping waves. We can't see other people drowning. Third reason, it's uncomfortable. You see somebody in pain, it's one of the main reasons that guys just hate it when women cry, because, well, they know how to, secure a 3/8-inch bolt with a ratchet, but what do you do when somebody cries, when somebody's in emotional pain? It makes us uncomfortable because we hate feeling incompetent. And when somebody's sad and we ask them how they're doing, and they say, well, I'm just doing terrible. The most common answer I hear is, well, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Because when people say they're feeling terrible, or I want to kill myself, well, then the whole room clears out because nobody has any idea what to say. And a last reason, although there are lots of other reasons that we don't want to see people's pain, is it adds to our own. We empathize with other people who are in pain, and we don't like being in pain. This writer continues, in the end, I chose to leave the conversation as it was ruining my happiness and making me question how lovable and worthy I am. Just like I was talking about, you don't like to talk about pain because it adds to your own. And it's good that you left the conversation. Your friend is now gone. That's over. You're working on your own pain, which is brilliant, so that you'll be more capable of happiness yourself, and then you'll be able to better recognize the misery of other people in the future. That's the only smart course of action to take here, as opposed to you could do I should have till you're dead. You'll just feel worse, and you'll be less able to recognize pain in a friend in the future. You continue, it's terrible news, and I can feel compassionate toward her family and friends, but I won't put myself through the pointless what-ifs and indulging in the drama. We only have now. The past is gone. We can only look forward and see what we can do right now. You've been watching some video chats. Really good perspective. Really wise. So you conclude, I'll offer as much help as I willingly can, and I can pray for her and her family. And I suppose that's what's most important for me to do right now. Unfortunately, everything else at this point for me would be just drama. Is there anything else you can see? Nope. And I love saying that. Nice work, nice perspective, nice choices. I know a woman who, when I first met her, was miserable, lonely, unhappy, came from a horrifyingly dysfunctional family, the kind where if you did a miniseries on them, people would say, oh, over the top, exaggerated, but no, it's quite real. And now works as a technician slash engineer in the oil fields of North Dakota and spends a lot of time fairly alone. The more loved she has felt, the more she came down here. We spent a couple of days together. We've spoken on the phone every day for a long time. And it's been the most delightful, joyful thing to watch her become gradually less afraid. She said she's just excited to get on Skype and say, you know, I encountered this problem today that nobody knew the answer to, and I just dove in and solved it. In the past, she would have wrung her hands and hid in a corner and hoped somebody else did it. And now everybody's attracted to her. Now that she's happy, and I'm not talking about sexually attracted, she's surrounded by guys. I mean, you can imagine in the oil fields of North Dakota. But no, guys aren't hitting on her. Guys just like being with her. And everybody wants to be her friend. And she says, I feel like I'm free to be myself. That's a brilliant encapsulation of what happens when you lose your fear. And then she adds, in fact, I feel like I'm free to be my genius self. Turns out she's a bit of an inventor and likes to create new products and has had things in her mind for years and done nothing with them. Too afraid. If you're going to propose doing something absolutely new and you're afraid, doing something new is just a chance to make a mistake. But now she's actually doing it. And she says, I feel powerful. And she said, it's because I feel loved and happy. The other day, somebody said, it just seems like there's a light coming from you. And they're right. If I look at her now on Skype, you'd swear there is a light coming from her. She just beams. She's a different person. And she's not some weird exception. Her family was horrifyingly traumatic. Here she works out mostly alone in the oil fields, so it's not like she's surrounded by all this support. And just getting a sense of who she is as she feels loved, as she has felt loved, has just changed everything in her life. That kind of thing is possible for all of us. All we have to do is keep at it and not quit. And that's what she did. Here's somebody who says, my husband has drunk more alcohol every year for many years. He's also taking an antidepressant, and he's not supposed to drink while he takes the antidepressant. In the last couple of months, I've been talking to him about how I'm concerned about his health because of his alcohol consumption. When he went through some additional stress, even more than he usually has, in September, he quit bathing and he drank more, and his body odor was so bad when he would drink, it smelled like something was rotting in his gut. He's been to the doctor. The doctor told him to cut down on his drinking, but he kept going. So I told him that I was afraid he was going to die. And there's ample reason, since he's drinking more and more, and his father died of cirrhosis of the liver. There are a lot of people who can drink till they're 100, and their liver seems to be made of stainless steel. If you have a family history of this and you drink, cirrhosis of the liver, probably not a really smart thing to do. So you're pretty smart to be at least concerned about him. I want to emphasize that even though this man's father died of cirrhosis of the liver, alcoholism has never been demonstrated to be inherited, but the cause of alcoholism is not inherited genetically, but it's passed on from generation to generation. It's the lack of feeling loved that causes people to drink. So one generation doesn't feel loved, they drink, they're completely emotionally unavailable for the next generation, who drinks, and on it goes. I guess that's called passing it on, really, rather than inheriting it. She continues, I told him I was concerned, that I wanted him to see the doctor again and do something about it. You could imagine, since he didn't listen to the doctor the first time, that he's probably not going to listen to the second time. She continues and says, he said that he would cut down. Every addict says this. I will cut back. And he gave me the parameters for the limits that he would impose on his drinking. If you were to say this at an AA meeting, the veterans would fall on the floor laughing and ask for help to get back to their feet. Every addict tells you what they will do or what they're willing to do. They try to govern their own recovery. But see, if they really could do that, they wouldn't be an addict. They wouldn't be an addict now. They would have already done it. So this pretty much never works. In 12-step, it's called bargaining. You confront an addict and they give you this detailed, sometimes not so detailed, plan about how they're going to overcome their drinking. Well, it hasn't worked in the previous 20 attempts. It's not going to work today. She continues. He said that if he didn't follow that plan, he would get help, like go to rehab. Never happens. Since then, he has been very inconsistent about fulfilling his plan. He simply can't control his consumption. Yet that's why they call it addiction. And this guy's on his way down the hill to destruction. His health sucks. His doctors told him to quit, and his father died of the same thing. He's on his way, and he's actually picking up speed. You say Friday night he drank socially after having gotten an email that indicated he made a mistake, counselor. Ironically, when he got home, he received another email about the same mistake, and he blew up. He started yelling about how none of his clients give a damn about him, how he hates these people, and he doesn't know that he can be their counselor anymore. He punched the wall several times. Then he sat on the floor and complained about his work, and I listened while he did this for a while until I felt like he fell into being glad to have an audience for his victimhood. And then I got ready for bed. I came back when I finished and told him I was going to bed. Oh dear, I know you think you're standing by and supporting him, but you're not. You've been enabling his victimhood and his drinking for a very long time, or he wouldn't still be doing it. And I know you haven't been doing anything to really stop him. There's no blaming. It takes staggering courage to help either problem, victimhood or drinking, much less both, and even harder with a spouse. But it can be done. There are lots of things that could be done. You could be talking to him every day. You could be reading together. You could be studying together. You could be practicing getting better at loving him. You could be talking about every unloving occasion. You could be getting the help from other people about how to talk to him and more. But now we're where we are. So those are things you could have done before. The question is what to do now. You continue. The next day, I told him that I need him to stop drinking because I can't watch him kill himself and ruin his career. And he said, well, I guess maybe I should just do that then. I'm not quite sure whether he meant kill himself or ruin his career, maybe both. Last night, he bought a bottle of wine on the way home, and when he brought it in from the car and saw me looking at him, he didn't drink any of it, but his daughters did. So what do you think I should do? It's your call, kid, but it's pretty clear that you don't have the ability to help him stop by yourself. And don't feel bad about that. Very few spouses have the ability to help an addict, or we wouldn't have addiction recovery centers all over the country. Most addicts don't take recovery seriously unless they are highly motivated. For guys, it's usually complete loss of their family, job, money, everything. That's one. Jail or death. And death's not a really great motivator because they're not there to be motivated. It takes a lot to get people to want to give up the only form of pain relief they've really ever had. That's why they're addicted. So you can do what you want, but I would say this, Fred or knucklehead or whatever his name is, you've already made promises to me and your doctor about drinking. It's killing you, but you won't stop or can't stop. What's the difference? That's your choice. But unless you go to rehab, that is like rehab that's directed by somebody else, where you go to a rehab center and you do what they tell you to do. You go to a rehab center that I choose, because see, otherwise he'll pick some easy fly-by-night outpatient rehab center that he's heard of that just flat won't work. And since I know you, my guess is that your insurance would pay for inpatient rehab. So unless you go to inpatient rehab that I choose, I will leave. That's what you say. He won't like it. Oh, he'll get angry. He'll tell you that you're controlling him, and it'll go on, and that you're not being loving, and that you're a hypocrite. And an addict backed against the wall will do just about anything. But you need to remember that giving him, he'll say, well, sounds like you're giving me an ultimatum. Don't back away from that word. You go, yeah, that's what they call this. That what you're doing is loving. It's not harsh. His next move at any moment could be dead. The next time he's on his way home from work, he's going to drink the bottle in the car so you don't see it, and then he'll be drunk and run into a tree, and you'll have a knock on the door, and you'll have a state policeman there asking you if you are Mrs. Jones, because he's dead. And I get to take those calls from the Mrs. Joneses because they didn't do anything when they could have. So, yep, lay it on him, kid, and if he decides that it's okay for you to leave, well, it might motivate him later, might not, but you can't sit around and watch that. Here's a lady that says, my best friend is from Venezuela, and she's pretty obsessed with tolerance toward race, ethnicity, and the like. I have yet to meet a happy person, I'm sure there's one somewhere, who is obsessed with, well, pretty much anything, but especially obsessed with telling other people that they have to be tolerant of anything. You see the contradiction immediately, right? Because people do this all over the country, especially around election time. So people scream in other people's faces that they have to be tolerant. In other words, they are completely intolerant of intolerant people, which is, just about as dumb as you can get. So in truth, what are they doing? They're screaming that they don't feel loved. They feel victimized in their own lives, but they've discovered the enormous satisfaction of what I call vicarious victimhood. Why do they do it? It means experiencing victimhood through somebody else's victimhood. If you scream to people that you have been treated unfairly long enough, they usually get tired of you and start avoiding you. But if you scream about the injustice done to others, you can bounce from one cause to another. You can show endless slides of starving and oppressed people in civil war-torn countries, and at the same time experience the enormous benefit of looking self-righteous while you ride a white horse. It's kind of intoxicating to be a vicarious victim. Victimhood is seductive. I talk to somebody every day who cries some version of, you couldn't possibly understand me because you're not a 59-year-old transgender, sexually abused, African-American, Aboriginal, Australian, Irish, Ecuadorian with ADHD who is right-brained and was raised in Antarctica with penguins. I hear some version of this every day. Woe is me, nobody can understand me because they're not, and then they name a whole bunch of things. What it translates to is, you have to understand me, but there's no way I'll let you. Which is kind of ironic, isn't it? Because I love being a victim. So I'm going to pretty much make it impossible for you to say that you really understand me. And as soon as you dare to say, oh, I understand, oh, you couldn't possibly understand, then we go through the list that ends in, being raised with penguins. And overall, it's getting crazier by the year. More and more groups are coming out and demanding understanding and tolerance. And it's getting increasingly impossible. Pretty soon, in every airport, we're going to have a separate chair and a separate area and separate guardrails and separate bathrooms for each person who walks in the airport, because everybody's going to demand to be understood. This lady who wrote the letter said, we both, my friend and I from Venezuela, we both voted for Hillary. But my friend has been so despondent since the election. The other day she came over and complained about her in-laws, who are Trump supporters, and her inability to educate them on, quote, even the most basic human rights. You can hear, right, the condescension and snottiness in that. In the past, we've always skirted this subject because we both know that we have differing views on it. But this particular time, I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I finally suggested that maybe she'd have more luck if she simply listens to her in-laws instead of telling them that they're wrong. Yeah, it's kind of funny how people don't like to be told that they're bad, So, continues the lady who's writing the email, my friend compared her cause, or being engaged in her cause, to being like Jesus. And at that point I suggested that she might be crossing over the line into self-righteousness while comparing her in-laws to the people who nailed him to the cross. I said, one of the big problems with explaining white privilege, which is one of the things that this lady from Venezuela likes to talk about, is that the term is actually designed to be difficult to understand. Just like the financial markets are intentionally introduce confusing terms so that ordinary people can't understand. At that point, some people walked in and my friend made an excuse and got up and left. Not only is a term like white privilege difficult to understand, but it's inherently accusatory, which people really kind of hate. It implies, if it doesn't outright state, that somebody has privilege that is unfair. So that person then becomes unfair and uncaring and oppressive, and people don't really like to be called that. The writer of the letter says, my friend texted me later saying there was a misunderstanding and she wanted to continue the conversation because she doesn't really mean to be self-righteous. I'm always impressed with how people don't mean to be self-righteous but are nonetheless very successful at it. The writer of the letter says, I told her I love her no matter what, and the conversation doesn't matter to me. I saw her several times since then, and she seemed uncomfortable around me, which she never has before. Victims hate being exposed as victims. Somehow deep down they recognize that they're unhappy and that they're on a hollow crusade, but they really don't want to hear it or be reminded of it. So let's be clear here. Serving oppressed people is not a bad thing. It's delightful. It can be selfless, even saintly. But serving people to decrease your own pain or to look good or to be self-righteous becomes confusing at best and at worst incredibly annoying and self-righteous. The writer concludes and says, I reached out to her and suggested that we continue the conversation so we don't have this hanging between us. And her response implied that she'd rather avoid the conversation because this is her life's work. And it grieves her that I don't understand it or support it. But she'd be willing to have the conversation if I wished. And now I'm wondering if I should just continue avoiding the conversation. It's going to be your call. You know your friend. I probably wouldn't have the conversation you're suggesting. In other words, about the in-laws or self-righteousness or saving the whales or white privilege. But you might have a conversation just to tell her that you value her friendship. And you don't want to avoid her, but you would rather avoid that one subject. I have a number of friends who have crazy views on one thing. We can talk about everything else. They just are kind of nuts about one thing. I'm sure I'm nuts about several things. You don't have to give up a friendship just for that. You two could simply have different views, and so what? New subject, about the election. Have I gotten a lot of emails about the election, like a lot. I have no personal attachment to Trump or Hillary. I didn't campaign for either of them from what little I've seen, and I don't get into politics much. It doesn't look like I would probably go on a Caribbean cruise with either of them. Neither of them seems especially unconditionally loving, so I'm not making a political comment here. But I am making a comment on victimhood, which we were just discussing, and how it can be demonstrated. They both said terrible things about each other, above average, even for politicians, but not all that out of the ordinary. Trump childishly referred to Hillary as crooked Hillary in public many times, and referred to her as a bigot, among other slurs, I'm sure. But then Hillary said half of Trump supporters were desperate for change and the other half belonged in a basket of deplorables. So, I don't know, tie as far as attacking each other. What was notable was that during the election, Democrats viciously attacked Trump for selling fear and for being hateful. And he did sell fear, and he was hateful. But then, after he was elected, Democrats literally filled the streets and every available talk show selling fear and being hateful. What's the point? I'm not attacking Democrats or Republicans. Yuck subject. The point is, victimhood is everywhere. And the election demonstrated it for all to see. Both sides were hateful and victim-y, and it was kind of embarrassing, to watch the whole thing, which is why I mostly didn't. And in the end, we're going to be fine. Gandhi said this: when I despair, and he should have known, he knew political difficulties probably as well as anybody. When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love, which he combined into one word, satyagraha, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fail. Think of it. Always. And no, I'm not calling Trump a tyrant or a murderer, but his point is, whoever gets elected to whatever, we may think that the end is near and the way of truth and love wins out. Look at the presidents that we've had. It's like a rogues gallery of people who are hollow, arrogant, narcissists, liars, and many of them did really great things for the country. I only read two subjects, history and science fiction. So I read about the individual biographies of a lot of them. They are very flawed people, and yet many of them did good, most of them, and we survived them all. So if you're unhappy with the election results, what can you do? Be kind to your spouse. Love and teach your children. Be nice to your coworkers. You could write your congressman or, found a political action group, but you'll do more to contribute to the well-being of the country by being loving to the people around you than by standing around the water cooler and either acting triumphant or bemoaning the recent election. It's not going to determine the course of your life. New subject. Since I'm tired of that one and hope to never hear about it again for another several years. I talked to a mother of a 15-year-old girl. We'll call her Endora. I don't know why that name popped into my head. If you're really old and you're familiar with old television series, then you'll know who I'm talking about. The mother is in the process of learning to love and teach. And the girl is really not happy that the rules have changed from, I will manipulate my mother and get literally everything I want. That's what the rules used to be. In other words, there weren't any rules. Kids don't give up anarchy and chaos easily, because in the chaos they get what they want. So the 15-year-old Endora has her friend over to the house, and the conditions were that she couldn't have friends over and couldn't play and use her phone and blah 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 until the chores were done. Well, one of the chores was taking care of the box of cat litter, and so the mother checked the box, and she called Endora down, and she was standing next to the litter box. That was like a hint. And she said to the kid, "You lied." The daughter looked at her with an expression that children are masterful at, and looked at her with utter innocence. "About what, Mother?" Another lie, because the kid knew what the mother was talking about. She was virtually standing in the cat litter box. This is a bad sign. They lie once, they just want to get out of stuff. They lie when you point out the lie. This is a determination to be irresponsible and to have her way. It's outright rebellion, and it cannot continue. Parents have to do something about it, or it gets worse. So the mother said, "You didn't do the litter box." "Yes, Mother, I did." Well, this is 3 lies in a row. The mother said, "No, you just smoothed over the top of the litter. You didn't do anything about what's inside it." Now we're going to go for 4 lies in a row. And the girl says, "No, I really did." Now, I've never personally emptied a cat litter box, but I understand that it's pretty easy to tell the difference between one that it's been used multiple times and one that's been actually cleaned. This is insane lying and a need to be right. Apparently it's not difficult to see great big lumps in a litter box. And the daughter says, "Well, but it looks fine." So she finally realizes she's been caught in her lie, but now she's going to justify the previous 4 lies. And she goes on and on. "You changed the rules and it looks okay and nobody can tell." She went through a whole list, and she was about to start at the top of the list. Maybe she memorized or prepared it to repeat her list of excuses. And the mother, who was following clear directions, said, "Okay, I've heard the lies. You wouldn't listen to loving or teaching, so now we just do natural consequences. First, you had planned to go from here to your friend's house after spending an hour upstairs. That's over. So you will not be going to your friend's house." 15-year-old starts squalling like a 4-year-old. Second, if you continue to make excuses, or if you complain, or if you continue to squall like you're doing now, your friend will go home right now, and then you won't even have the hour that remains. The squalling stopped. So what's the pattern? With children, you love and teach. You love and teach again, perhaps again, depends on how many times you've taught that principle, and then you teach with consequences. The consequences are how life works, and you're simply preparing them for that. The next day, the girl said, "I'm going to go live with my dad," because the mother and father had been divorced for a number of years. Ironically, of course, she hates being around her father, but see, this is just a way of punishing her mother, who went to considerable lengths to get custody of the kids. So I'm going to go live with Dad. Mother texted me and said, "What do I say?" I said, "You say, fine. Go ahead and move in with your dad." Because she'll get a rush of power over you from storming over her dad's, but she hates being there because he's a violently angry man, and the whole reason she's living with you in the first place is because of that. So she'll hate it, and she'll come back home. We must love and teach our children, and if necessary with consequences, or they grow up to do this with their bosses, then they get fired. They grow up to do it with their partners, then they get divorced, and now we have children living in multiple homes again. We can teach them now when it's easier, or we can wait till they're older. This girl's 15. This is on the older side. The older, with every year, they get more wounded, and they come to believe that the horrifying way to live is the only way to live, and then they get way harder to teach. New subject. I know a woman who is dating a man, middle-aged woman, and the man is irresponsible, unloving, completely different spiritual path than she does, and completely unwilling to learn. But the woman is lonely, so she dates him anyway. Pain is very motivating, and loneliness is a particularly poignant kind of pain. Now, from time to time, she'll bring it up, and he'll express an interest. He'll say, oh, I'm interested in reading a real love book, but he doesn't. But because he says that he's interested, because he says he wants to unconditionally love her, then she's so happy. And he gets the sex that he wants just for reading a book. Not a bad deal for him. It makes her a fairly cheap, whatever word you want to use. But he doesn't change. He doesn't learn. He doesn't grow. The woman does not want to lose this companion. So, quite unconsciously, she begins a campaign to justify the relationship to herself and to people in real love that she knows. The relationship's not healthy, but she's got to do something to justify being in it. So she takes an unusual path. She blames herself for not being loving enough. Most people don't go this way. She said, yes, we need to work on ourselves, but first I need to work on myself. Yeah, we do need to work on ourselves first, but she was blaming herself so that she didn't have to face his disregard for learning to be loving. She said that he was that way only because, in other words, what did I say about him? Irresponsible and unloving and uncaring and stubborn. She said that he was that way only because she hadn't been loving enough. But see, he was that way before he ever met her. So she's taking responsibility for conditions that pre-existed her by, 5 decades. Kind of clever in a way of her to blame it on herself so that she can keep a companion. But when you're choosing a partner, your working on being loving is not enough. The other person also needs to have that interest, or why continue? If your partner doesn't have to have an interest in learning to be loving when you're choosing a partner, well, then just choose random names out of the phone book. It's a little different if you're already married. In already married relationships, you do your best to be loving and you see if that makes an impact on your partner, but not so much while dating. And these two are not married. They're not in a permanent relationship. And she's settling for way less than she needs just so she's not lonely. And then eventually she'll marry him so that she can now say, well, but I am in a committed relationship. So, I need to stay with him and work on it. And it's going to end just horribly because he's already proven that he has no interest in learning at all. We're going to talk about in a little bit of a different way, about a subject that we talked about earlier, choice and being trapped. We talked about that when the lady felt trapped with her client when she pulled her up to the house and the lady wanted to keep talking in the car. It's a subject we talked a lot about in the last couple of retreat weekends here, so this is a good illustration. I know a man who expressed an interest while he was here with his wife some time ago, that he actually wanted to have sex with his wife. I know, it's kind of crazy. But they'd been married for quite some time, and what would happen is he would wait until he was really frustrated at the lack of physical and emotional intimacy, and then he would ask for sex. So when he waited too long, it would come across as demanding. She would then feel trapped by his demands and feel controlled. So what was her response to feeling trapped and controlled? No sex for months at a time. Of course, his desperation is increasing, so he's becoming more demanding. She feels more trapped. He gets more demanding. It's an endless cycle, and it becomes just unbreakable and awful at some point. So what do you do? I asked her, so what do you want? She said, well, I don't want to have sex. I said, did you enjoy sex before the two of you met? Or shortly after the two of you met? She said, well, yeah, I did. So then the truth is, I said, not that you're avoiding sex. That's not what you hate. You just don't want to be controlled to have sex. She looked a little surprised and said, oh, I guess that's probably right. So I have a solution, I suggested. I suggest that you give him sex. She had a look of horror on her face because that was exactly what she was claiming she didn't want. It's a complete change in perspective, I explained to her. Right now, you're having sex like you were a trapped animal. It's time to grow up and be a partner, which includes being a sexual partner. If you want to be in a loving relationship, that involves you being loving, you. So you give him at least one thing that you know he likes. He doesn't express a preference for a lot of other things, sex, but because you want to, because you want a loving relationship with a partner, which means that you have to be a partner. Now, if you don't want a loving relationship, well, then withhold sex forever and keep playing this game with him, and the two of you will eventually divorce. I said to him, what do you want? He said, predictably, more sex. I said, nah, you want her to be willing to have sex with you. You want her to want you. And much like she did, he had a look of realization and said, yeah, that's what I want. So I said to her, can you say to him, to your partner, Fred, once a week, I want to have sex with you, and I'll do anything I want. She looked horrified. She said, well, there are some things I won't do. I said, of course. And I turned to him and I asked him if he knew what those things were. He said, yes. So I turned back to her. I said, well, then there's no problem. He's not going to ask you for the things that you're terrified about. And she said it. She said, Fred, once a week, I want to have sex with you, and I'll do anything you want. He looked like a child in a candy store. He looked so happy. It's her wanting him that he wanted, and offering herself that he wanted. And she began to see it differently almost immediately when she saw that she was not trapped, simply by the act of changing her perspective to offering her partner, her sexual partner, come to think of it, what he was asking for, which is true for a lot of us. There are a lot of things that we say, well, I have to do this. And I've discovered if there's something that I have to do, well, then why not choose that I want to do it? And suddenly it goes from a chore to, I want to do this. It's got to be done. And if my attitude is good about it, I'm going to enjoy it. So I want to. Changes the world. But you can't fake that unless you have what you really want most, which is to feel loved. So what do? Like we've talked about 1,000 times. We find the love that we need. We trust it from the people who give it to us. We remember it during the times when we're not actually being given it. And now we've really got a foundation from which we can give it. And on that foundation, you can build every variety of happiness you could possibly imagine. We'll talk about it some more in a week. See you then.